Good morning or afternoon to those joining us from here close on the West Coast and afar. Welcome to FSMA Fridays. It's hard to believe we are already in November. Lots of activity this year. I think it's been quite the banner year, we'll say, for FSMA, all things FSMA. We're excited to continue to host these monthly sessions, and we'll continue the dialogue. My name is Jill Bender, your host with FSMA Fridays. I would like to share a bit of news. Moving forward, after today's session, I am delighted to be passing the ball over to my colleague, Brian Sharp, who will be hosting these moving forward. He may pop into this session as well. But for today, I'll look forward to hosting one more time FSMA Fridays with our delightful online community. It's amazing how many people are joining us. But as always, as a reminder, everyone, if you should only be able to see the panelists, you will get the recording as always. The questions are absolutely welcome. Let's go ahead and put those into the Q&A tab. And I'll look forward to hosting today. So with that, delighted to have with us on the Acheson team. Today we have Christopher Snabes. Good morning, Christopher. Let's unmute your line, or it looks like you can unmute it yourself. And then we also have Eric Edmunds. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning.
So let's go ahead. There you are, Christopher. I knew you were there. Good morning. We were just chit-chatting a little bit before we started about Thanksgiving. I know that next week is a holiday, so thank you for joining us earlier this month, and then next month as well is a little bit earlier to account for the holidays. So with that, as always, we're just going to dive right in. Eric, why don't you share with us what is the latest on the FSMA front?
So yeah, it's only been a few weeks since the last FSMA Friday, but the name of the game at this point is watching for FDA guidance. There's a new FDA guidance on supply chain verifications that we'll be talking about more later on as the main topic today. But just keeping an eye out for FDA activities. Those guidances are still coming through, and then they're also working on a few other guidances in other areas such as menu labeling and nutrition and dietary fiber facts. As far as the new nutrition labeling goes, it's been, the compliance deadlines for those have been extended a little bit, but the menu labeling is still coming up next May. Other than that, the proposed rule for the extension of the produce agricultural water testing requirements, that closed just a little bit ago, and I know there's some comments supporting the extension and some not, so we'll have to wait and watch what FDA decides on that extension of the compliance date. And then just generally from the field, we're still seeing a lot of environmental monitoring coming from FDA, both in facilities and in products, random product sampling and having the inspectors go out and take samples throughout facilities. And it's not just the FDA, a lot of states are doing the same thing, and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency is as well.
And I know that's a lot of what you're also hearing from your clients that Acheson Group works with as well, right? You guys are out in the field keeping tabs on all this stuff. Interesting. I have noticed quite a bit of chatter about the extension, you know, positive and negative. So I think that's interesting. But thank you for that update. As you mentioned, there is a new compliance document out, and we are going to be focusing on that today. But just wanted to bring up the tag and safety chain survey that we recently done and pulled out one component that is around supply chain controls. And some interesting stats as we go into today's discussion as far as, you know, from an operational standpoint, what the survey respondees shared with us. And, you know, surprisingly, 33% of vendors provide annual updates to them. Well, if you think about that, that's 67% that aren't, so it's quite a big number. And then, you know, close to 60% aren't able to track the rank or supplier performance, which is a little bit high from an industry standard. And then just in general, that immediate visibility of supplier non-performances is obviously becoming much more important as we ramp up here on FSMA. So with that, we are today focusing on the recently released FDA guidance document for supply chain controls. Quite the mouthful of that document, right, Eric and Christopher? But I know that the co-manufacturer focus as well. But I would say, I believe, Christopher, you're going to go ahead and just dive right in and let us know why specific guidance for co-manufacturers.
Well, thank you, Jill, and we're definitely going to miss you hosting FSMA Fridays going on further. Co-manufacturers, as many people can relate to, are responsible for a very large number of FDA-regulated products. Eric and I and others at the tag team have been to numerous facilities where a co-manufacturer might make one or several or quite a few different products for either a single brand owner or for many multiple brand owners. This can be due to cost savings or physical locations of the raw materials and for efficiencies. There are several brand owners who also co-manufacture for other companies, and that's also due to efficiency of equipment and cost savings. So this is a really important guidance for co-manufacturers. Specifically, how and who will be responsible for approval of the suppliers for the co-manufacturers. In general, co-manufacturers will use the suppliers that the brand owner tells them to use. And that's usually due to contractual reasons. And there lies the catch. Who is responsible for approving the suppliers? Is it the co-manufacturer or is it the brand owner? How does that work? And we're going to talk about this in a moment. Who does it apply to? This co-manufacturing guidance applies to all food manufactured for humans as well as for animals. And it also applies to those who follow the FSVP, in which case the FSVP, that's the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, only has to state their importer identification. And Eric's going to explain a little bit about that later on this morning as well. It's important to mention that this guidance states that the supply chain controls will not be enforced until a later date. But here's the catch. Co-manufacturers and brand owners should follow now prior to it becoming enforced. Why is that? Well, if an issue comes to be and the FDA comes knocking on the door and they come in, and if you are responsible for some type of food poisoning outbreak, they're going to say, why didn't you follow the existing guidance? So although it says should, you really should actually start looking at it now instead of later. Eric?
There always is a catch, isn't there? So Eric, are you going to share then who, does it apply to everyone? Is that where you're going to go next?
Yeah, so the guidance really explains that FDA is not going to be enforcing supply verification to the full extent that it could, but it's only in this specific relationship that Christopher explained of the brand owners and the co-manufacturers. And they explain some kind of specific situations that they're looking into later on. But so the big point that I'm trying to make is that this isn't an exemption from supply chain controls for everybody. You have to first determine if you're in this brand owner or co-manufacturer relationship. And then, as Christopher explained, the contract relationship or how you're dealing with it right now, you have to look into who's controlling the hazards and how different suppliers are being approved. So first off, not everyone implements supply chain controls, even from the co-manufacturer brand owner. If there's not a hazard that requires the supply chain control, then you don't have to implement this preventive control, and this wouldn't apply to you. However, if there is any hazard, and microbiological hazards are a very common one that is controlled throughout the supply chain through certificates of analysis and on-site audits and things like that, if there is something like that, that the supplier is controlling the hazard, this guidance applies to you and designates these specific circumstances. And it's not that you don't have to do anything. You have to do something. It's just giving you a little leeway and timing to get your relationship, your contract with the brand owner and co-manufacturer aligned to be able to share the appropriate information. So not to everyone, and if there's no supply chain preventive control required, it doesn't apply to you either. But if there is a supplier control in there, it's really important to get familiar with this document.
And so discerning if there is a requirement, that's part of some of the other guidance and rules, correct? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so. Oh, no, it's interesting when you say that, you know, in order to sort of, if it does apply to you, you need to sort of understand other components as well. Or is it fairly straightforward in this guidance document if our audience was reading through it?
Well, the important part that's not in the guidance is that the co-manufacturer is typically receiving an ingredient or an item that they may not have personally approved. The thing that they still would always have to do was conduct a hazard analysis, and now they have to get certain bits of information from the brand owner who approved the ingredient to be able to verify that the brand owner is implementing the proper supply chain controls for the hazard analysis that the co-manufacturer has conducted for the ingredient.
Okay, got it.
So the hazard analysis is the really important aspect to determine if you need a supplier control.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. As always with these sessions, it's a continuous learning process here, which I know everyone can attest to on the call with us. Well, why don't we go ahead and sort of define a little bit further. Christopher, I know you were going to sort of share, the receiving versus the supplier component of this.
Right, thank you, Joe. And as Eric was saying, there's a difference between a receiver and a supplier and who does what. A receiver is a facility that's subject to the human food or animal food preventive control requirements that either manufactures, processes a raw material or other ingredient that it receives from a supplier. A supplier is the establishment that manufactures, processes the food, raises the animal, or grows the food that is provided to a receiving facility without further manufacturing or processing, unless they're doing some de minimis items such as relabeling. The receiving facility is the co-manufacturer that is subject to human food or animal food preventive controls, and it manufactures the raw material, as I stated. So the co-manufacturer tends to be the receiver. The co-manufacturers that are receiving facilities, as Eric said, need to identify if there's a hazard in a raw material or ingredient that requires a supply chain control. And then they're required to approve that supplier. However, the supply chain provisions permit an entity other than the receiving facility, for example, the brand owner, to determine, conduct, or both determine and conduct appropriate supplier verification activities, provided that the receiving facility documents its review and assessment of that other entity's documentation. So what that means is, if the receiving facility looks over all the documents that the brand owner supplies them to approve that supplier, they have to make a statement somewhere in documents that says, yes, I am the receiving facility. I have reviewed my suppliers that the brand owner told me to use, and I approve them. Just a simple statement, but it has to be documented. If it's not documented, it never happened. The supply chain program has provisions that permit a co-manufacturer to review and assess the documentation of the brand owner's determination, conduct, or both determine and conduct appropriate supplier verification activities, provided that the co-manufacturer documents, as I stated. If a contract prevents a co-manufacturer from being able to review the brand owner's documentation of supplier activities, the co-manufacturer would not be able to verify the suppliers based on its review. So what does that mean? The co-manufacturer would then need to conduct supplier verification activities of their own, such as an on-site audit, that might otherwise not be required. So hopefully the brand owner and the co-manufacturers have a very good relationship where they're willing to share that information. But sometimes there are trade secrets, and Eric and I have seen this in the field, where some items just can't be shared. If that happens and a brand owner is directing the co-manufacturer that they have to use a certain supplier and they won't show that documentation that the brand owner approved them, then the supplier is going to have to do its own supplier verification activities.
Oh, interesting. And is that fairly common, especially in the co-manufacturing environment, as far as not trading? And again, everyone on this call is probably nodding their head, but just for my own layman terms, I'm just curious about that.
So, you know, we've seen it both ways. I've seen, in general, most brand owners will try to share as much as they can unless trade secrets are involved. If trade secrets are involved and it's not discussed explicitly in the contractual language, then the receiving facility, meaning the co-manufacturer, would then have to conduct its own verification activities. But, you know, hopefully there's open discussion amongst both parties, but we have seen it where some of the information is not released.
Interesting. Well, and I think your old adage, and we hear this all the time on FSMA Fridays, and certainly from our colleagues at Safety Chain that have been in the business for a super long time, as far as if it's not documented, it hasn't happened. You know, I know that plays so much more importance under our new age of FSMA here, definitely. And with that, of course, you know, when you have a rule like this, there's always enforcement, and we've touched on that quite a bit, especially what's trending, you know, what the tag team is seeing out there. But well, you know, let's chat a little bit about that. Eric, what to share with us? What is enforcement of the provision?
Yeah, so as you know, being a guidance document, this isn't quite the same as the regulation or the statute, but this is showing what FDA thinks is their best idea, their approach of addressing any of these supplier issues right now. And the interesting or something to note about this guidance document, you'll see a lot of them that are being released in FSMA right now are draft guidance. This one is not draft guidance. It's actually stated in the document that additional input was not necessary, and this is effective immediately. So it's something to be on top of and be looking at, and as Christopher explained, there are things that you need to do immediately, and right now some of that is dictated by the relationship that the co-manufacturer and the brand owner have, but there's also additional factors in play between, for example, a brand owner and the actual supplier. Right now, the brand owner and supplier may have contracts in place where the brand owner is not able to share any of the food safety documentation from the supplier, such as on-site audits or third-party audits, different testing results, just because of contractual language. So FDA has taken this document to explain these specific instances where they will accept kind of a minimal amount of information while contracts are being rewritten to make it possible to share this information between co-manufacturer and the brand owner. So what that gets down into is the two areas, both for the human food rule and the animal food rule. The two major areas are approving suppliers and only using approved suppliers, and then verifying that suppliers have appropriate food safety programs in place. So with the supplier approval, if the brand owner is at this point just saying, I'm approving this supplier and the co-manufacturer has to use this ingredient, but is unable to share specific information, for the time being, and this is going to be until November 6th of 2019 that they're allowing this kind of lesser information. The co-manufacturer can satisfy the supplier requirement by knowing that the brand owner is approving the supplier, and then the co-manufacturer has to describe within their food safety plan the activities that the brand owner is conducting as far as supplier controls. And then if the co-manufacturer within their hazard analysis identifies additional controls that should be implemented that the brand owner isn't implementing, the co-manufacturer has to start implementing those at that moment. Some of those may be something as simple as receiving ingredients at an appropriate temperature and documenting receipt and storage to prevent allergen cross-contact, things like that. But if they can't get any information from the brand owner they do have to start doing something and getting those supplier verifications, which may be a duplicate work that the brand owner is already conducting. The important part is they should have information, at least general information, what the brand owner is doing to approve the supplier. And then the next aspect is the supplier verification. So the kind of the baseline standard for any Dakota hazard in FSMA is the requirement of an annual on-site audit. And that's some of the records that are the most difficult to share via different contractual arrangements between brand owners and suppliers. So for the time being, if it is a Dakota hazard within the co-manufacturer's hazard analysis, they should have information and be able to get basic information from the brand owner that describes, at least states, that the brand owner is conducting on-site audits, and although the information isn't there, the brand owner has conducted the verification activities. And then the co-manufacturer can decide what additional activities may be required for, like testing incoming ingredients for microbiological hazards. But it just sets up that time period where contracts can be rewritten, but it doesn't mean you don't have to have at least basic information from the brand owner regarding supplier right now to assess the hazard and see what's actually being done. And the other final requirement regarding supplier controls is the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. If you're implementing supplier controls within the animal food and human food rules, the only additional requirement ends up being registering and identifying all incoming goods as being subject to Foreign Supplier Verification Program. So the co-manufacturer or supplier would just be entering that information as their receiving facility with their address. But that wouldn't necessarily require an additional supplier preventive control.
It's just interesting. I think there's a lot of information there too. As always, the recording is available, but that component. It's interesting when you mentioned the effective immediately and not up for further review. Now you're saying that was fairly uncommon. That's not the norm from the other documents that have come out.
Well, not necessarily the norm for what you've been seeing in a lot of the FSMA guidance documents, just because a lot of those that have many scientific tenets, they're actually accepting additional input from industry and academia, just the public in general, to determine if they had made the right decisions. But this is basically the FDA stating, this is the requirement, we're going to give you leeway for a year, and then, but it's not really interpreting or adding any scientific explanation. It's just basically stating, we'll let you get by with this minimal information while you rewrite your contracts so you can get all the information and be in full compliance.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for that. That's interesting. It sounds like, I know certainly in the past year or so, there's been a lot of questions around co-manufacturing and these components. So I know today's session was so important with that document. And that's readily available. I know that the Acheson Group, the tax team, always puts those on your website typically for easy access as opposed to having to dig those out. So thank you for that. Wow, okay. It looks like we are at the Q&A part. If there is any questions that have come in, one was regards to the recording being available. Absolutely. There's a lot of the key information that was shared here today. I think another question that came in, and I'll lop this over, to either Eric or Christopher, just in reference as far as through the end of the year, any other guidance documents that you're aware of that might be coming out on the forefront? I believe you might have mentioned it, just not in reference to this year.
This is Christopher. I'm not aware of any other than the ones that Eric had mentioned. Eric, do you have any other ones?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so the other one that came out recently that I mentioned was in regard to the menu labeling guidance. As far as the order or the timing for exactly when new FSMA-specific guidances are coming out, I don't have any additional information. They seem to just come out on a sporadic basis, and you just have to be on the right email lists and catch them.
It's that crystal ball knowledge of not knowing. Well, it certainly sounds like the FDA is not resting on their laurels this time of year. So we'll see what comes out their way as far as that piece goes. Another question did come in, and it's really more just in reference to the Acheson Group. So I'll just throw it out there real quickly, though, and I'm always a proponent of explaining what the Acheson Group does. But just in reference to co-manufacturing, the question was, do you provide an audit sort of service to help as they have to sort of rewrite their plan?
So this is Christopher. I can just respond to that. So the TAG group, we do, when we come into a facility, we look at the whole operation from top to bottom, and it's more of a holistic look. We don't perform quote-unquote audit. So when we come into a facility, we come there to help the facility. We don't give them a score. We don't give them a grade. We tell them what they're doing right, what they need to do as far as opportunities to improve, and we also give additional guidance for best industry practice for whatever is going on in their facility specifically. It could be sanitation tips, it could be preventive control tips, documentation tips, and it's everything from soup to nuts, so to speak. We give it the whole big picture, and it's a very long, detailed, in-depth process, and we make sure that they're not skipping any of the FSMA requirements at the same time.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. Anything else you want to add to that, Eric?
No, that's a great summary. We really try to stay away from the idea of being an audit, and so we try to look at the holistic operation and actually offer observations and suggestions for improvement.
No, absolutely. The audit can be misconstrued, so I appreciate that clarification there. We are coming at the bottom of the hour. I just want to just mention a few more things, and we'll see if any more questions come in as well. But again, people often ask, how does safety chain support from a FSMA compliance? And again, to Eric and Christopher's point, we are not auditors. We don't, audit your work or anything like that. We just provide the means to more effectively manage and document so that you can prove that what you're doing is accurate. So when an auditor does come into the door, it's a lot easier to showcase that. But more importantly, just to really help sort of mitigate those risks and control your costs. So always a big fan of talking to people on this FSMA Fridays and seeing if we can help you. We do offer a ROI calculation as well, so always encourage people to reach out to Safety Chain. And with that, let me just take one more look at questions, make sure that I have not missed anything. Actually, there was one last question I'm going to throw in there. Just wait a few more minutes. One person is asking, are the brand owners responsible for an annual on-site audit of their suppliers? And that might be a good question. Christopher, Eric, is that something you can address?
Yeah, so I can handle that one. Depending on the hazard analysis, if the brand owner has identified the hazard being as controlled in supply chain and being a Sakota hazard, unless they can justify not doing an on-site audit, they would be required to do that. What this rule or this guidance tries to do is saying the co-manufacturer has to do that as well unless they get the information from the brand owner. So right now, the brand owner, it would be required since they're the one approving and verifying the supplier, but there has to be a sharing of information between the brand owner and co-manufacturer, so the co-manufacturer is aware and able to review that documentation itself at this point.
Okay. Got it. And what we'll do is I'm going to recommend that we post that question and your answer, thank you, on our FSMA Fridays LinkedIn group, because I think that's something that has come up before as well, so it's a very good question. So with that, my goodness, another FSMA Fridays here and gone. As mentioned, our December session will be earlier based on the holidays. So, well, still about a month away, but on December 15th is our next session. Everyone will get a link to the recording. We often post on blogs sort of encapsulating the key points. And as Christopher and Eric have mentioned, the Acheson Group is a great resource at Safety Chain. I always say this, but it's true. We all read their newsletter as well, and dialogues go around about that. And we hope to see you all out there. We're going to be at Food Safety Consortium coming up here very quickly, as well as we always support the SQF Info Days that they have. So with that, my goodness, both Eric and Christopher, thank you as always for sharing your information today and the continued dialogue on all things FSMA. I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure, and good luck, Joe. We're going to miss you.
Yep.
Thank you. It's been lovely hosting these sessions. I think it's been years and years, and I love the fact that we continue to get a large crowd, and then it continues to be an informative resource for the industry. So with that, happy FSMA Fridays, everyone. Have a lovely holiday weekend, and we'll look forward to seeing you in other capacities out there. Have a good one.